Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. I am Joey Erickson. I am joined, as always, by Nate Atkins. We have a lot of practice now under our belt. We've seen a lot now. There's 6 practices in. Both quarterbacks are in the 60-ish range of attempts. I think Richardson has 63. I think Jones has 57, somewhere around there. Those are unofficial totals. That's just what I've seen so far. Anyway, I think I'll just start here. I'll give you where my head's at, and Nate can give you where his head's at, and then we'll get into the rest of it. I thought for Daniel Jones to have a real shot at this, that he had to be far and away more accurate than Richardson. And numbers wise, like Richardson so far is not necessarily way ahead of where he was in camp last year. In fact, he's a little bit behind. But the thing is, Daniel Jones, it's not like Daniel Jones is completing 75% of his passes. He's been a little bit more accurate in terms of throws. I don't think either guy is very high on yards per attempt. We don't have the yardage because they're not tackling, but I don't think either guy is very high in yards per attempt so far. I just think, like, Jones, to win this job, had to show you that he was far and away more efficient, and he hasn't done that through the first 6 days.
Yeah, I'm still where I was when this signing went down with Daniel Jones, which is that this competition is still much more about Anthony Richardson and what he does and doesn't do than Daniel Jones. Because, like, there's one player who has something to unlock, something really big to unlock that we haven't potentially seen. And we're just curious if he can do that. If he, like, all these questions we've gone over with Anthony about, can he stay on the field? Can he, kind of grow and mature both in the playbook, but also just as a professional as he's turning 23 years old? And, can he do enough with his accuracy to, round out this profile? Because we've seen all the upside with the big throws and the explosive runs. With Daniel Jones, I know there was a part of the Colts that when they signed him did talk themselves into some extra levels with him because of the supporting cast he had with the Giants. But I think for the most part, if you're being rational about it, this is still about one of these quarterbacks was kind of an otherworldly athletic talent and kind of a very boomer bust draft pick that's ultimately the lottery ticket in the AFC, in a way that Daniel Jones, he was supposed to be more like that baseline. And so I still think, like, if Daniel Jones if he was completing like 60, high 60s% of passes, but Anthony Richardson just consistently every day looked like last year again, or got hurt again, I think that was going to be Daniel Jones's route in the end. But because it's more about Anthony didn't answer the questions about his durability, accuracy, understanding of the game, professionalism, all that kind of stuff. I didn't see a world where, like, if Anthony looks like he's moving in a much better direction and he's staying on the field, that it was going to be like, let's just track all their plays and Daniel's slightly ahead, so let's start him. Because I just think that would go against everything they've said about give this kid time and patience, and don't write him off, and with all the stuff they said at the beginning, we're drafting him for what he can become, not what he is right now. And if he's starting to become that, really, it was just because, to me, it just came down to, this is the last opportunity he has this camp to show, are you becoming that, or are you stuck in the pitfalls of last season to a point where we don't think we can win with that? Whereas we feel like we have enough of a supporting cast that's a lot better than what the Giants had, or I shouldn't say a lot better. They may think it's a lot better. I think it's better, but that's better than what Daniel Jones had, to where he can do a little bit more of the Gardner Minshew approach, and he just kind of brings a floor to everything. But to me, and there's a lot of different ways we go this conversation, but to me, and I don't, especially with this ownership change, just with the transition, I should say, to the Irsay daughters, where It's sort of it's a different person judging the people in charge, different loyalties, all that kind of stuff. I think there's more pressure on them, on Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen, to get something out of Anthony Richardson, because I think like they have to prove now, like, why should they come back? Why should they still be the guys to bring back for year 10 for Chris Ballard, year 4 for Shane Steichen, or year 3, I should say. It would be going into year 4 for Shane Steichen. Like, I just didn't think that like a 9-8 season with Daniel Jones, I don't really see that being the thing that does it. Whereas a 9-8 season with Anthony Richardson that has some ups and downs, and maybe he misses a few games, but he is really, really moving in the right direction on all those areas from last year. And you feel like, hey, there's a chance to still hit a lot of this upside. If not all of it, then enough of it to be like, we have a guy that can really move the needle at times at quarterback. I think at some point they have to be realistic about what these guys are and what they can become. And Daniel Jones, I think when we watch him out there, he is a lot of what he's been, which is been in the past with the Giants, which is he's a very good, he's a good mobile quarterback. He does well once he decides to run and get to the sideline of turning, a play that maybe dead in the water into some kind of a decent gain. And he has a lot of experience. He's seen a lot, and he's not really a rattled player, on a mental level or just with, connecting with receivers. But there's one player here who's going to move the needle, and that's Anthony Richardson. And if he's starting to show you he can move the needle, he's going to win it. If he can't show you he can move the needle, he's not going to win it. But to me, it was similar in a way to position we don't really talk that much about, which is center, where they said that like it's going to be a competition between Tanner Bortolini and Danny Pinter. They know what Danny Pinter is and isn't. To me, that competition is also about, is Tanner Bortolini ready? Is he showing you the improvements? Is he kind of growing up in real time on the field? But it wasn't about like, I don't think it was as much in Danny Pinter's control as it is in Tanner Bortolini's. I see the same thing for the quarterback position.
Yeah, if like for Jones to be more than Minshew, I think he'd have to be. He has a couple of seasons where he's at like 67% with the Giants. And I think if you do that, like Minshew was only 62 when he was here. And that's, I think that was one of the things that like surprised me, was that he wasn't super accurate about Minshew when he was here. We just haven't really seen that. I mean, and I think there's been the thing that sticks out to me about Jones so far in camp is just whether it's him being late or him staring down a receiver or some combination of the two. I feel like there's just been a lot of routes where the receiver has settled down. Sometimes I actually think the receiver was never really open.
Yeah.
He's just stuck on that guy. And there's been a lot of contested catch, like high percentage throws where the throw isn't bad, but it's incomplete, because the defensive back is there and knocks it away, or a linebacker's there and knocks it away. It just hasn't been the super high efficiency that I would have thought could, maybe give him a shot in this thing. Richardson so far, I looked this up today. We're on an off day. I should have looked it up before camp. Richardson so far, there's been, to me, there's been some good, some bad. The last 2 days that we've seen have been much more accurate. There have been some bad periods where he's really struggled with his accuracy. Last year in training camp, I had him at 61% unofficially. Right now, he's running 55-ish. If you take out a pretty bad day in the red zone that Jones also was pretty bad, he's probably up higher. I don't really want to take that out, though, because I think both of us would agree that was not a great day for either quarterback, not just from they're in the red zone standpoint, but from a like accuracy standpoint. So in terms of what we're seeing from Richardson, I think it's a little bit hard for me to know if it's a huge step forward right now. But I've been trying to avoid saying it this bluntly. Daniel Jones hasn't done anything special. Like really, on the practice field at all. And I thought that the one place that maybe he could be special was if operationally, if accuracy wise, sort of those like game manager type things, he was way up there, and we just haven't seen it at all.
Yeah, no, that's the thing, is that like there's some parts of him that very much fit a veteran who's played a lot. I think his demeanor, his abilities to work with wide receivers, pick up the playbook. He's not been the one out there with false starts. Anthony Richardson had to work through the cadence issue. So you see some parts of that, but as far as like when he drops back to throw, it doesn't feel like you're just subbing in this guy that is so high level veteran that Anthony can't come anywhere close to that because of that stuff where he's staring down a receiver, he's holding it. He has a little bit of that Minshew in him where he's like, he'll just drift and drift and drift and hope that a guy who's covered is all of a sudden going to not be covered or something. And then he kind of throws it, and he does like, it's not like he throws it way into harm's way, but he throws it and like, you just know it's not going to be completed on those passes. They're just so covered. And that's leading to some of why the secondary is getting so many hands on footballs, is it's just a little too easy when they're that locked in on a guy who's not open. And so, yeah, it's just it's at a point where like Anthony has made some nice strides the past 2 days on accuracy mainly, and some of the placement. I've liked just watching his ball placement on those outside the numbers throws, because those used to just kill him. Those guys moving east-west outside the numbers, I felt like you go back to watching him throw next to C.J. Stroud at the NFL scouting combine, he couldn't hit that for anything. And then it was a big problem last year. He's showing a lot of strides in those areas. He's just fixing a few things in real time that are encouraging. So he had that issue with the cadence. His cadence it was either too low or not loud enough, and it was leading to false starts. And he shared about how the offensive line brought up that they need a different cadence. And he took that criticism, and we haven't seen the false starts the past couple of days. So it feels like he's able to smooth out the edges and get better. We haven't seen like the full version because he's sacrificed the deep ball doing all of this. And when he has done the deep ball, it just feels rusty, frankly. Like we've seen him launch a ball 65 yards in the air for a touchdown pass, and by all means, by all measures that we know, he's healthy at the moment. They've not really, they're erring on the side of caution if they feel like that shoulder is getting any wear and tear, and they're just letting him go, and day-to-day he's worked at it. But it just feels like the emphasis is so off of anything deep that we're seeing all these approaches underneath. So the rounded out version of him that's going to get everyone really excited is when there's a mix of both of those, and he hits, a couple of those explosive downfield throws. He gets a couple of runs, and that's what we can't fully see in training camp is the rushing part of it. But when he's able to do more of that design runs or just scramble plays where he's actually going into, forcing cornerbacks on the perimeter to tackle this 240-pound quarterback who's got a head of steam, when he can combine that with better accuracy and decision-making, and that's going to excite you. But I think the two areas where I'm most impressed with Richardson's growth would be those throws outside the numbers, and frankly, just the lack of turnover-worthy plays. Is that I feel like as we look back to last season, it was, the three areas that everyone hammered on, including us with him, was that low completion percentage, the durability concerns and all the injuries, and then, some of that, the professionalism and just the way that he kind of carried himself as a leader in the face of the franchise. But I think what got lost a little bit in that was there's just too many turnovers for the amount that he played. And we talk about staying on the field. It's not just completing passes to turn a third down into a first down. It's not giving the ball right back on a sudden change and putting that tired defense back on the field. And so what I've liked is I think he has one pick so far, and that was the one that Juju Brents tipped up. That Anthony Gould was covered, and Ronnie Thomas grabbed it. I think that's the only pick.
There's one. He has another one. He underthrew a deep ball.
Oh yeah, that was Juju picked that one too. He underthrew
a deep ball. That's kind of what you were alluding to, though. We haven't seen, like what you were saying earlier. Like it's just been. It feels like he hasn't cut loose on a deep ball yet.
Yeah.
which is weird. That's a weird thing to say of Anthony Richardson.
It is weird. And like that one pick to Juju was a very bad both decision and just the way he threw it. It's weird though, because we saw him complete a, I don't know, deeper intermediate pass to Anthony Gould yesterday. It was just a weird play because he's scrambling around. He's under duress. He launches late, kind of falling backwards, and the ball comes out and it's like a total duck, but just the look of it. But what I liked about what he did, and I saw Shane got very excited when it got completed, was it wasn't just a duck-like jump ball. Who's going to do something with this duck in the air? It was like thrown in a way that was going to break Gould open from outside to inside, where he had the leverage to go haul in a ball that wasn't looking very good, but it was put in the right place. It just looked a little bit more aware of the moment in the matchup. And we didn't see many of throws last year where it felt like that's what he was doing. So there are some nice improvements so far, but I would like to see that deep ball come back, because that's the thing outside of his rushing. That's going to be the thing that puts him a cut above, that gets you still reaching for it. Like, hey, what if we just smooth the edge a little bit? Because that's going to put defenses in an impossible bind if they can actually do it with consistency, keep it on the field. Is that you have a backfield of Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, teams crowd the box, and you have Alec Pierce going deep, and the stress that it puts on a defense to cover every blade of grass. Like, that was the model that Cam Newton took to the absolute heights at his peak. That's the hope you're looking for. We haven't seen that here, but I'm still encouraged by the fact that, like, we've seen it before from him a lot in the past couple years, and we're seeing new things that it lets you picture a world where, like, there's something more there from him if he can round it all out.
Yeah, he has to have the explosive and dynamic plays, because, I mean, the idea that he's suddenly going to turn into a 69% passer for 47, that's crazy. So he has to be able to be explosive. And I will say this, like, Daniel Jones is a very good runner. We've seen it out there. He's got some speed to him. He knows when to pull it down. When he goes, he really goes. He's still not as he's not as dynamic as Richardson is. And Richardson is he's not like a Lamar. Colts fans know this. He's not super shifty. His is just speed and power. It's like Cam. It's a lot like watching Cam on the run. Like, and they do some of the stuff that they used to do with Cam, where you're putting him in a position to run people over. Now, that at times has led to injury where it didn't with Cam. That's another conversation entirely. But Richardson is a different animal as a runner than Jones, because he just gives you a next level that Jones doesn't give you. Jones is a very good runner. Richardson, when he's healthy, it takes your running game to a different level because of some of the stuff he can do. So the running part, not worried about that. He's got to have he's got to have the explosive plays in the passing game to make up for, not completing as many passes. And I want to get back to the cadence thing, because that's actually an interesting thing to me. We've talked a lot about in the last 2 years about how the Colts maybe have not done some stuff that they should have done with him. Someone should have said something about the cadence in the last 2 years. I would generally think that that's probably more quarterback coach.
Yeah.
But also, just to, like, let fans know, because here's the thing: cadence does not sound like it's that important. It doesn't sound like it matters that much. I know, to a casual fan, it's like, you know what? It's really fun to mimic, a cadence in the backyard when you're playing with your friends or whatever. How can it matter that much? If you've ever heard, like, Peyton Manning talk about this, or Aaron Rodgers talk about this, or some of the really good, like Brady, all of those guys spent an enormous amount of time working on their cadence. Rodgers is probably the best at it because he was really, really good at making people jump. You know what I mean? But, like, the cadence and letting your offensive line know and your receivers know the same thing it's the same sounds every time, so you're ready to jump off the ball, is really, really important. It's an operational thing that you don't necessarily see because you can't hear it on the TV, really. I don't think that as fans that people are able to listen to it well enough to know this is consistent or it's not consistent. The thing I go back to is, was it last year that there were a couple of random Quentin Nelson false starts in a row?
Yeah.
Like 3 of them. Quentin Nelson is not a sloppy football player. He's just not. Like, especially with something like that. Quentin Nelson is obsessive about that kind of stuff. And to me, it signaled that there was maybe an issue with the cadence. I shouldn't be the only one to think that. Like, the offensive line shouldn't have to go to Anthony Richardson and say, hey, there's an issue with the cadence. It's very, very important. And, I don't know, maybe they did say something, but the way Richardson said it, like the offensive line came to him and said, hey, we've got to work on this. Like, that's an example of one of those things that Richardson doesn't know. I think it's pretty obvious at this point, and it's been talked about by a lot of people that he's kind of naive as a quarterback on like some of the stuff that goes along with playing the position. The quarterback coach, Joe Flacco, Gardner Minshew, somebody at some point should have been like, hey, you have to figure this out. This is way more important than you realize.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. It's like you think back to it is a window into how we got to a lot of places with Anthony. So you go back to, he started 1 year in college at Florida, and his coach designing the offense, Billy Napier, is a big-time recruiter. He's a big-time culture guy. He rose up as a wide receivers coach. He's not a quarterback guru type. And so I don't think Anthony learned the emphasis, the importance of that early. And it's one of those things like, yeah, it's one of many areas that this Colts coaching staff kind of just let fester for a while. And then if no one's correcting it, and then it gets more and more habitual for him to just do it the same way. And it shouldn't take an offensive line bringing it up. And that's why, so like we talk about pressure on, there's so much pressure on Anthony Richardson, on Shane Steichen in terms of designing the offense, developing Anthony. There's also pressure on guys like Cam Turner, his quarterback's coach, to be better with stuff like that. Like they had an issue where like he didn't know a lot of these preparation things. And it's fair to be like, hey, you should probably have clued in a little bit earlier. Like you would like him to have that. But the reality is that he wasn't. And they didn't address a lot of that stuff until they benched him and sat him down midway through his second season. And then here we are entering his third year, and he's got to be told by the offensive line to do a different cadence. It's just like I just don't know that he's gotten enough of that help and that instruction and that really just firm emphasis from the coaches that have been around him here. And so, yeah, that's a fair point. And that's where like Cam Turner is going to have to turn in his best year because, there were issues with him back in Arizona with Kyler Murray before they put in a study hall clause because he wasn't taking his job seriously enough. So there's a bit of a pattern here of like mistakes festering with young quarterbacks that don't get corrected until someone else in a franchise has to introduce something that the quarterback coach should have earlier on. So I think that position is very much under the microscope this year too.
Yeah, and ultimately, I know Shane Steichen is ultimately responsible, and he's developmental, but like he's also the architect of the offense. A lot of his conversations with Anthony over the last couple of years have had to be about what works best, that kind of thing. Like you have assistants on staff to do some of this stuff. Honestly, you have backup quarterbacks on staff to do some of this stuff. They haven't gotten guys who are known as mentor types. Yeah. In fact, Joe Flacco sort of proudly tells you he's not a mentor type. He's there to play. And
well, that's fine.
Point. That's fine if you have him. That's fine if you have him. And yes, there is some of that is on Anthony he should, like, as a player, you should look at, a veteran and, figure out that maybe there's something you do there. But also, like, I really think the positional coach, it's hard to know, but that feels to me like that's exactly the kind of fundamental or minutia that falls under the position coach's responsibility.
Well, and when you think about it, the dynamics on game day, Shane is calling the offense, also making different decisions as a head coach with a headset on, talking to Jim Bob Cooter, who's up in the booth about the next play. Jim Bob Cooter up in the booth isn't going to be clued in on the cadence part of it. It's on the quarterback's coach to read and figure that out. He meets with him between every series, and there should have been something about, like, why is Quentin Nelson jumping false starts all the time here? And there just didn't seem like that came together until we get here in camp and the offensive line is bringing it up. We brought up a good point about how, like, there's not a lot of developers on this staff. I've covered Jim Bob in 2 spots, and I think he brings a lot to the table. But his best work in the past was when he stepped in as a quarterback's coach for Peyton Manning. Not that he needed a quarterback's coach, but that's kind of how he learned a lot and rose up the ranks to then kind of rewiring Matthew Stafford first as a quarterback's coach and then as his play designer. That was a guy, a talented, he's very different than where Anthony is now, where he knew how to do a lot of that basic stuff, but needed a rewiring of his style and the offense he was in. And Shane Steichen's the one who has that background of taking a quarterback from ground zero with Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts, but he's not in that role anymore. He's the head coach with the headset on, talking to the offense coordinator, deciding on play calls and designing an offense for everybody. The quarterback's coach is the guy in that spot, and they just need more out of it.
Yeah, and I think with Shane, the other thing is he had Herbert and Hurts as a coordinator when he was responsible for designing an offense that fit their skill set. When he was in the more of the assistant role, he was working with Phillip Rivers.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine a quarterback who needs less help on something like cadence than a guy like Phillip Rivers. So
Herbert and Hurts also played like 3 years in college. So it's quite possible likely they came in the league and they already had that. And so it just wasn't as front of mind for him.
Well, and I don't know off the top of my head who the quarterbacks coaches were in those places either, but like Steichen's role as offensive coordinator was more design,
Yeah.
Anyway, we've probably gone a little too long on this. I just think that, like, it shouldn't take till maybe it's been addressed before. We don't know. All we know is what Anthony said, but I feel like this is something that should have been emphasized and stressed previously. We'll see where the quarterback battle goes. I think, like, any impression we have right now is probably too early.
Yes.
They haven't really done anything for real. Like, we're taping this on Wednesday, July 30th. They've had 6 practices, but they haven't done a ton of, like, I know that Shane Steichen intends tomorrow night's practice, Thursday the 31st practice, to be fairly intense. And then obviously they have joint practices coming up. Those are going to tell a ton. Like, we're in the early stages of it. So we'll see where it goes. Obviously, it's the quarterbacks. We're going to be paying as much attention to it as possible. But that's where I think we are there. Some big news from the Colts this week. Bernhard Raimann has signed a deal, 4 years, $60 million guaranteed, worth $100 million overall. Puts him, I think, tied for 6th in average annual value of tackles. So not a top of market deal, but a high level deal, big money deal. I think I don't think we talked about this last week when he told 107.5 The Fans, Jake Query, that they weren't close yet. There was a part of me that was like, this will get done. Like, they always sign these types of guys before camp. Like, people will remember Quentin Nelson signed literally the night before, So I had a feeling it would get done. It turned out it did. I think that stuff is maybe a little bit more overblown. That's just probably normal negotiation stuff. And then they got it done. So they have the left tackle now.
Yeah, it's I've expected to get done because not only, was it hard to picture any alternative that sounded remotely good to not doing it, but it's like it's Chris Ballard's type of player to re-sign. It's his draft pick, the bet he made on its developmental player that would get risen up through development, through time and in raising to the level of that room that he puts so much into. He loves the trenches. He pays every offensive lineman who becomes something. And so the timing also just was going to work for it, where Braden Smith, they reworked his deal to lower it a ton this year, and then he's a free agent next year. And so it'd be interesting to see how they factor in that conversation now that they paid the left tackle too. But either way, they were if they're going to try to build up a passing game and a quarterback that position's haunted them for so long, they were going to need the left tackle. You do not want to get in a spot where you're looking for a left tackle and a quarterback of the present and the future. The last time we saw that happen here was 2022. How did it go?
Well, the placeholder left tackle got the placeholder quarterback.
Yes. And so Bernhard Raimann has, in his camp, had the easiest case to the Colts, where they go, your last left tackle before me was Matt Pryor, and your backups behind me are rookie Jalen Travis and Blake Freeland. And that's kind of what's interesting about the nature of the left tackle position. It's like nobody has this developmental, almost no team has this developing tackle that they can just sub in there and let the other one hit the open market. That happens occasionally at other positions. I think there's times that happens at wide receiver where the contracts run together, and you can end up, you're evaluating 3 different spots or 4 different guys who play, and then maybe one can step in to be a number 1 receiver, and you kind of move on from a different guy. That happened in Dallas with Amari Cooper. They traded him away and let CeeDee Lamb become that next number 1. But the only way that would happen on the offensive line is if you had a right tackle that you just are saying we're going to move him to left tackle. But then you have a right tackle opening, and that's not a whole lot less problematic than having no left tackle. So it just was all set up for Bernie to sign and lock in, and we knew he wanted to be here, and it's a perfect fit for him next to Quentin Nelson playing for Tony Sperano Jr. And the deal came in right where it makes sense to me because, among the recent deals signed at that position, the ones that are just a little bit above his $25 million annual value are Rashawn Slater, Tristan Wirfs, and Trent Williams. Those 3 are Pro Bowlers, and that's the next notch above where Bernie is, who's been very solid, but you're hoping the next step for him is become a Pro Bowler. But it's exactly in line with Laramie Tunsil from the Commanders, where that's a many-time Pro Bowler, but he's also nearing his 30s. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot of analysis to give for this. It was just they just had to do this. We would have had a much more interesting podcast just if they never did it, because it'd be I don't know how you could have justified that given the fact that the price was only going to go up for Bernie. If they waited till if they said we're going to wait till after the year and maybe franchise tag and go do it then, if he's a Pro Bowler this year, then that price tag is going up. It was not really going to go down unless if he had a major injury, and then you're screwed at left tackle no matter what. So it just was set up for Bernie to sign it, and it's good that they did it this early. So it just nice to eliminate one of these distractions and not have it linger.
Yeah, I do think Chris Ballard justifiably takes a ton of heat, but I do think that it's worth saying that Bernhard Raimann probably goes down as one of his best draft picks. You just don't typically find a left tackle outside of the first round. I can think of 2 franchise type left tackles found outside the first round, David Bakhtiari and Teron Armstead. Those guys are the exception, not the rule. I don't have the information in front of me, but I know that in terms of just value and finding a left tackle, you usually find that in the first round and usually high in the first round. To get a guy in the 3rd round who'd played tackle for 2 years and have it work out like this. You brought this up yesterday while we were standing out at practice, but where he was as a rookie to where he is now, it's not only to me a feat of scouting the player, it's also they scouted the thing that drives Bernhard Raimann, which is his own self-improvement. Like when Central Michigan told him they were switching him from tight end to left tackle, it was COVID. They didn't have any time. And so basically he taught himself to play tackle by himself, That's a different kind of thing. He taught himself to play left tackle in by himself on his own. And that's the kind of player he is. I know Tony Sperano said that the first time he met Raimann was right after he got hired, and Raimann was coming out of the indoor facility dripping in sweat in like the middle of winter. They not only do they think this guy has the athleticism to turn into this, they thought this guy has the makeup to do it, and it turned out they were right.
Yeah, to back up your point about how hard it is to find tackles outside the first round, of the recent guys that have signed major deals over $20 million at left tackle this year, it's Rashawn Slater, first round, Tristan Wirfs, first round, Trent Williams, first round, Christian Darrisaw, first round, Laramie Tunsil, first round, Andrew Thomas, first round, Bernhard Raimann, third round. So that's pretty impressive, especially it was the right kind of bet because he was in the third round because of a clear lack of readiness. But it's a hard bet too because you're trying to learn one of the hardest positions out there in a pretty unforgiving league where confidence can get shattered at that position. And it's very interesting the path he's taken just with it was fascinating the path he took to get to the Colts from Austria to the MAC. And like you said, learning the position in COVID, but even his journey from getting here where from year one, they could not have done a worse job developing him just in year one. Because in year one, that's when they had Matt Pryor, a guy who told them I can't play on the left side, and they said do it anyway, who wasn't going to be able to hold up there. Then they throw Bernie in. Bernie's first start in this league was on the short week road trip to Denver. Some of the guys he had to go up against in block after being thrown into that line, and what you wanted was what they have now, which is when they bring it, when they sub in a Tanner Bortolini, it's the line's going to raise things for you. You don't have to be the front man. That whole line was an absolute disaster in 2022, and he felt a lot of it. And I remember when he had that game in New England when Sam Ehlinger took 9 sacks, and Chris Ballard shared the story about Bernie walking back to the bus, just tears rolling down his face because he just felt like he can't handle this and he's the one at fault. But they were betting on him to be able to withstand that enough to then make all those improvements. And then in the next offseason, we see him and he's 15 pounds bigger. He added a lot of that strength that he didn't have as a rookie. And, he started to fit next to Quentin Nelson and all this stuff started to take off. And so it's a big credit to their scouting staff on the person and the skill set. But the other person who needs a huge shout out is Tony Sperano Jr. for coming in after Chris Strasser and just rewiring everything, not only from the technique and the scheme of those 5 guys playing together, but it was just like a breath of fresh air to have a coach come in and really believe in the guys that were there. And Bernie has felt that. That was such a switch from the year before with Chris Strasser, completely different level of energy. As I did a story in that Bernie's first camp where Chris Strasser was talking about all the things that Bernie can't do. And, Tony Sperano Jr. comes in and starts just pumping belief in all the things that he can do. And that's kind of how Bernie took off. He's one of the nicest and kind of most positive energy guys that you'll be around. And I think that some level of kind of positive reinforcement and then letting that build with the improvements he added in strength and technique, it just built off from that. And it's been maybe their best success story, at least one of them, in terms of how much better a guy is now than when he got here. There's Zaire Franklin, who was a 7th round pick, just a special teamer who's up there. Kenny Moore being a waiver pick who, didn't really do much early on and wasn't playing well as a special teamer to now be a Pro Bowl nickel. Like, they've had some really good hits like that, but to do it at this position, this is as premium as it gets. It's one of those all the time we talk about, like, you either have it or you don't. It's hard to just kind of learn to be a left tackle in a league with these pass rushers. But Bernie had the skill set and the makeup to handle it, and they brought him the right coach at the right time to bring it all together. And this is what we're seeing.
Armstead is actually probably a good, like, not necessarily like a comp, but he's a good. It's kind of a similar thing. 3rd round pick. The thing with Armstead was he was at Arkansas Pine Bluff. He was at a very small school, and he was just super athletic. So also very raw. He had a very rough. I know for a fact he had a very, very rough first camp with the Saints, but they did a better job of having somebody in front of him. Where when he had to play because of injury, not because of the reason Bernie had to play, which was just absolute incompetence everywhere on the offensive line, just a smoldering dumpster fire of offensive line. But similar in that you take that guy and that for whatever reason they're raw, and then they end up being the right guy. But that's why I think he ends up being one of the best picks, because you don't get those guys in the 3rd round and have them develop into the kind of person you can give this kind of extension to. There's another guy out there who doesn't sound like is going to get an extension. Alec Pierce said last week that he thinks his understanding is that he's going to play this year out and see how it goes. The dynamics are a little bit different positionally. I don't know if Chris Ballard really wants to pay $20+ million to 2 receivers. I know that's probably sounds like a lot. If you go look at the wide receiver list of paying, it's probably not, especially if Pierce hits the open market. I know this. Alec Pierce wants to stay in Indianapolis. I know there's been some talk about, like, is this a guy that wants to find his quarterback situation? Pierce wants to be here, but the dynamics are just a little bit different at the position, I think, than it is. Plus, he's also Bernhard Raimann is a guy who makes an impact every snap, one way or the other. Pierce is a little bit more of a lightning bolt type player.
Yeah, it's one of those where, like, not only do they have Michael Pittman Jr. under contract, $23 million a year, but Josh Downs is going to be in a contract year next year. And so they have to make a choice here a little bit. It just isn't realistic for them to pay 3 different wide receivers at the veteran level who are as good as these guys are, when teams all the time are finding ways to, like this is where it's different than left tackle. Is if you don't have a left tackle, like, you have to devote your 1st round pick to it in most situations. And then that even feels like a pretty big gamble. There's a lot that just flame out from the 1st round. Wide receiver in recent years has been such a gold mine in the draft, in not just 1st round, but 2nd round and 3rd round. There are Pro Bowl players coming out of those rounds that you can feel like if you let someone go, you can go to the draft and find the next guy. So it's a little different there. But it's interesting because I feel like in the perfect world, they were looking at the way these were stacking up, and they pay Pittman, and if they want to pay Downs, they could let Pierce go, and they drafted another player in the 2nd round a year ago, an A.D. Mitchell, who had all this talent and was your kind of classic outside wide receiver, vertical threat. But that's where it complicates a little bit. Is I don't, AD he's certainly still early in his career. We have to see a lot more play out with training camp and then into the season. But as of right now, you're a far, far way off of feeling like that's a replacement on any level for Alec Pierce. So it's one of those things I think that was in their mind of, I remember going into that draft, I just really felt like they were going to draft a wide receiver in the 1st or 2nd round. They toyed with the idea of trading up for Malik Neighbors. They ended up drafting A.D. Mitchell in the 2nd. Part of it was that Shane Steichen absolutely loves having 4 legit wide receivers that he can play around with. But I think there's an element of it that's looking at the way these things are going to play out with contracts. It's like, what if we can get this star player, a really good wide receiver in the second round, who by year 3 of a 4-year rookie contract looks like he can be a real dude. That would give you a chance to let Alec Pierce walk if the financials get tough. It's not working out that way at that spot. And so they do need Alec Pierce quite a bit in the theoretical way of like they don't have a developmental guy behind him. And he really is the perfect type of receiver for Anthony Richardson, for an offense that's trying to bring defenses to stack the box and play single high safety in the middle of the field, or just devote fewer resources to the deep levels of the passing game. When you have Anthony Richardson who can launch it anywhere, and Alec Pierce is one of the best at running under it. So, and the way it's played out is they do need Alec Pierce quite a bit. It's going to be tricky to figure out how you play the financials of that. And I don't know if maybe they're open to signing Pierce and letting Downs walk, and then Pittman would have one more year on his deal after this one, and maybe it lines up that way. And maybe with Tyler Warren, if he's kind of your a really nice receiving threat, kind of the intermediate range, maybe that combines with Pierce pretty well. There's some different options there, but Pierce is going to have a really nice market because that ability to fly down the field and create explosive plays. I mean, that is the heart of quarterback, of offense in the AFC, of the high ceiling type teams. That's going to be the path to get Anthony Richardson to be that kind of quarterback if it's in him. And Pierce brings that, and he brings kind of just a reliability as far as a receiver doesn't demand the ball and also blocks really well. It's become a nice fit here, but we'll see how good of a fit it is on the contract sheet as we go forward.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like if AD Mitchell takes a step forward this season, everything kind of changes a little bit there, you know? So because then you have a situation where you have a guy who's still on a rookie contract, and much cheaper and able to take over that spot. The draft, it seems, puts out good receivers every single year now. And so you can maybe replace that spot a little bit easier. It's a kind of a spot where you can wait and see a little bit more on how it's going to go. Getting back
to just real quick, it makes it a little interesting to look back at the trade offer that the Colts made to the Giants to trade up. And if they were taking Malik Neighbors, now the Giants weren't passing on that, but if they had taken that deal and it was Malik Neighbors here, first of all, I'd be very curious to find out how they fit that in with an inefficient passing game, like where guys even play in the meantime, because Neighbors is clearly like a very classic, give me the ball and I'm going to make plays, and he does make those plays, receiver number one type. But they instead of being able to do that, they draft Latu, and then they take AD Mitchell in the second round, and it's just a big year facing both of those guys to make big time improvements and justify those draft positionings. But if they had Neighbors here, it's like it almost felt like they would have to let Pierce go, or just have to move on early from Pittman, because it's like there's just too much. It's like you'd have way too much here that needs the ball and is just that powerful. Instead, they really need AD Mitchell to step up and look like a guy who could start here next year. So that it just really big year for AD Mitchell in an obvious ways, just for him, but also just for figuring out this receiver room.
From a training camp standpoint, I think the one other thing that we should talk about on this podcast is just that they somehow made it through the first 5 days without much in the way of injuries, and then Tuesday happened. Yeah. And Tuesday there was a list of like seven guys who either were out or went out during there. I think the most important one is at cornerback, where Jalen Jones suffered what, it looked initially like a pretty serious hamstring. It's hard to know with those, but he was running with the receiver and pulled up like harshly, just stopped, laid on the ground, didn't really move around, didn't get up and try to walk it off, just went straight on the cart. They all use a cart because the medical facility is like through a forest at Grand Park, but it seemed like a fairly serious hamstring injury. Juju Brents is dealing with a hamstring injury. Hamstrings in general, you kind of assume it's like at least a week. But you know, that the thing about that is those two guys were competing with Justin Wally, and I thought early in camp that both of them had made their case for it to be a real competition, even though Wally's been getting most of the first team reps. You lose a week or two here, and suddenly that third round pick and the way he's played so far becomes very, very important to this team.
Oh, yeah, because also we don't know how long it's going to take these guys to get back. It's interesting, like two very different injury histories here where Juju Brents unfortunately has had this just happen time and again. 5 different body parts, I believe it's been, that's led him to miss time just in two seasons so far. And he was making good plays, but this one pops up again. Jalen Jones, though, played every single game the first 2 years. And I just don't really remember him dealing with much of anything in that span. And now here he is with a significant injury. His reaction was pretty intense. And I wonder how much of that is like, this is a guy that just doesn't, he hasn't really gone through this before, at least not the NFL level. But I think also they just realize how important this is for everybody, obviously for the team, but for these guys, like Jalen Jones, he started the past 2 years, and you get a third year of starting, like full-time starting reps at outside corner, and it goes pretty well. Like, that's a position that gets paid pretty well too. Juju Brents feels like he's facing a make or break third season with his history. So Justin Wally was the guy who has time here, but now all of a sudden he's got to really make it happen. If these guys are going to be out, the hamstrings can linger sometimes. We've seen it for Jelani Woods linger a whole season. So that's on the extreme end, but you still don't know when they'll be back, when they'll be able to go. And so Justin Wally, and I noticed he's been getting a lot of reps, but for a while there, I just kept thinking, like, I'm not seeing a lot out of him. Part of it, they're cross-training in between outside and inside. So I think a lot of it was kind of a learning curve for him, but he has been starting to make a couple plays the last couple practices. He had a great play yesterday when he covered Michael Pittman Jr. on a dig route, just had him blanketed and then reached kind of around him and swat the ball away right as they tried to throw it at the outside to use Pittman's size as the leverage. It didn't work, and Wally was able to swat it away. So that's what they need, is not just him showing that he has impact plays, but like the light bulb going off like that so that he can ascend and take that spot. Because right now you look across the secondary and it's like they've got, Mooney on All-Pro, Charvarius Ward All-Pro on one side, Kenny Moore Pro Bowler in the slot. Cam Bynum looks like a stud at deep safety. Nick Cross, I think, when insulated with all that, is going to be pretty solid at strong safety. But we saw this scenario back in 2022. Sorry to keep bringing up these memories of that wonderful season for people, but that was a loaded secondary that had one weak spot in it at the second outside corner spot, and it killed them. It's just like it gave teams a way to avoid Stephon Gilmore and those safeties and just go after whoever was out there. Early on, it was Brandon Faison until they decided to play Isaiah Rodgers. But it was like, if you have one weakness in your secondary that's that kind of extreme, especially at outside corner, offenses always take advantage of that in a passing league. You're reacting to them. So it's a big spot for Wally to at least kind of raise to the level of being reliable and solid. And he doesn't have to be a star because they have plenty of stars in the secondary. But all of a sudden, we were talking about, like, a couple of days ago, they have almost too many DBs to get on the field. They lose 2, and it's like it's all on Wally now. For right now, until those guys are back, it's all on Wally to kind of bring that floor back.
Yeah, and we've been, one of the things we've been talking about is when Charvarius Ward is on one side and Kenny Moore is in the slot, whoever is manning that other outside corner position is going to see some targets.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If I was game planning against the Colts, I would be like, no, I don't want to throw it at Ward. You can test Kenny Moore sometimes, but I'm not throwing it at Ward. If I'm looking for a place to target, though, I'm targeting the third-round rookie or either of the other two over Ward. So whoever plays that spot is going to see some targets, and they're going to have to play good football.
Yeah, and one thing that helps with them is that Ward is so good that they can devote Bynum more to more helping out with that spot. That's one advantage. Like last year, what I hated about how they set up the secondary is that Kenny Moore had to try to glue everything together. It's like they didn't have reliability on either outside spot. And so both guys needed help, and they didn't have enough help to give them. This year, at least, the nice setup is you've got Ward, who's so far looked like he can lock a guy down. He's had such nice tight coverage on Michael Pittman Jr. while also making plays on the ball within that man setup. And then, that just lets you be more aggressive with Kenny Moore, but also like Kenny can become a little bit more of that resource for just one outside corner spot rather than two. And then Bynum, who they love to move around, can go over there and help out as well. So they're going to insulate him as long as they don't have other injuries, and we're still early. But they should be able to insulate Wally with a pretty veteran and strong group around him. So it's up to him to see if he can kind of he doesn't have to be the star, like I said, but he's got to be reliable, or they're, in a man coverage scheme, teams absolutely are going to find ways to get after him.
Anything else we missed from camp? Zaire Franklin being out the first 6 days, we're getting to the point where I'm starting to wonder.
Well, yeah, that goes back to, we talked on day one, and I said, I got to see him out there before I feel great, because we have had linebackers coming into the season with ankle injuries before. Not saying it's the same situation at all, but until you see a guy out there on the field, I'm not going to just assume that he's going to step in and fit like a glove. The good thing has been that they have a lot of reps to figure out what the heck they have behind him. And Joe Bocci has been the one making the most plays, but it's still, we got a long way to go where these guys have just not played in real game situations, and they're still not doing that. But also with Zaire, like at some point, I do want to see how he fits in the Lou Anarumo defense, and and just kind of fits with the calls. They've been having Cam Bynum step in and handle a lot more of the kind of leadership responsibilities, but that's supposed to be, that's one of Zaire's best strengths when he's really working well, and he needs his own bounce back in a couple of ways from a year that was, good in moments, and it got him to a Pro Bowl and led the league in tackles, but certainly had other moments on and off the field that he really needs to bounce back from. So, I'm curious to see when he's going to be out there and just what that does for bringing the defense together. They need a little bit of time to play with him, at least.
Yeah. They've had a lot of guys rotating at linebacker. I like a few of them from a roster standpoint. I think Joe Bocci is basically Grant Stewart. Like, he's a special teamer who, if you have to play him at linebacker, will play well in a limited standpoint. I think that's probably the way I would look at him. They have a guy named Austin Ajike who has played well in coverage as a backup Mike. I think he's maybe a sleeper for a roster spot. People always think that when we say this, I mean they're going to be like a star. No, I care mostly about the 53 at this point. And then Cam McGrone was having a decent camp before he got hurt, but that's kind of been his whole NFL story, is the issue with getting hurt. So they have some guys that maybe as depth pieces, but I still don't know if any of them get hurt. If Franklin or Carlisle get hurt, how you feel about them right now with the depth piece. I want to see Franklin out there. I want to see Franklin back and playing and healthy, and he's still got a lot of time. But the other thing is that Chris Ballard said that they thought he'd be out there right away. Franklin kind of said the opposite. Makes you wonder what the actual timeline is. I just wonder when we're going to see him in pads. We see him, just not in pads or a helmet or really anything football related other than a Colts shirt.
Yeah, we just got to see, can the linebacker room with him out there collectively get to a serviceable enough level? Because as we just saw about the secondary, like they're going to go after that second corner, because why would you test all these other great players? Well, if Wally or one of these other guys ends up being pretty good, like that's a scenario you want, where you're forcing them to deal with corners who can get their hands on footballs. But all of a sudden, we saw last year where teams didn't even have to do that on third down, because they could just target the linebackers. And so I want to see, I don't know that there's a lot more for Zaire to unpack as a coverage player on an individual level, but the way that they insulate him and the others around all of these great resources in the secondary is interesting. It's also, if the linebacker room is a big weakness overall, like it could be if Zaire's not out there, teams are going to look at this secondary and go, and some of the pass rushers, and go, why would we drop back when we can go heavy and run? Like we talked about in the last podcast. And so Zaire's supposed to be a key answer to that as the NFL's leading tackler. And he missed tackles last year, but there is part of it you could say, for him and Kenny Moore, who missed more tackles than normal, that they were on the field so much that there just was some diminishing returns there. So I think there's a way where Zaire can bounce back and be like that, where that's a huge strength of his, where if the defensive line interior depth isn't as bad as last year, if they're not on the field as much, that he can kind of take control of the run defense. If he's able to do that, it's a nice answer, or at least it's going to force some teams to pass. But if they get to a point when he's not out there and these other linebackers can't step up, teams are just going to find ways to avoid all the resources in the secondary. And that's not what you want when the whole offseason's been about, let's not just fix the secondary, let's turn it into a huge strength. Let's bring the fight to teams through that group. You want to be able to bring that fight and not have other teams just avoid your fight.
One other piece before we go. It's a long podcast, but that probably should have been expected after us getting a just huge download of information from the Colts after not having much information for a while just because of the offseason. I know a lot of people have wondered, how Braden Smith was going to handle. Most people are familiar with the story I wrote on him and what he dealt with in terms of a very specific term of obsessive compulsive disorder, and the fact that he felt that he had gotten better and was in a better place, that there was a lot of that's why the Colts re-signed him. But I know a lot of people have wondered, as time went on, how things would go. We talked to him 2 days ago, and I got to be honest, he was even in a better spot than when I talked to him in March. There had been a school of thought that he was going to basically do the interview with me and then not really necessarily talk about it after that. He answered every question on it. He was expansive. He's a guy who seemed really comfortable with himself. And, I think one of the last quotes in the story from his wife from me back in April was that people have asked her, is this the same Braden Smith? And she said, no, this is a different one. This is somebody who, I think this is who he was meant to be all along. Like, it's just an interview. It's not him on a day-to-day basis. I would say that Nate and I would both say the way he did his interview on Monday was different than probably any Braden Smith interview that anybody else on the Colts beat has done outside of me. I had the one when he talked about this the first time, so I'd already kind of seen this version of Braden Smith. 6 months, not 6 months later, 3 months later or whatever, he was the same. He was the same. And I think that there's probably for you as somebody who hadn't talked to him before, you kind of saw that difference.
Yeah, it was refreshing, very different. Just to hear him be expansive and sort of open to the questioning. It used to be like he wouldn't be open to that even on some very mundane stuff. And here he is talking about like his life weighing in the balance and some very big picture, scary life stuff. And he's very open on it. And definitely go check out Joel's piece if you haven't, because not only was it super well done, but there's so much, it's so complex to get through that stuff. And I'm glad you were writing the story on him talking about it, because it's like there's so much to look up with the specifics about what he was dealing with in the medical process, the psychedelic process he took to get in this place now. But it puts him in a place that's very interesting for this year and going forward, is like, what is going to be the version of Braden Smith we see on the field who has this sort of new lease on life. And it's interesting because he's in a contract year with a very low deal. It's very much like a prove it type situation, which is not what you often see for a guy who signed a deal like he has and has had such a nice career. But you have this mix of, like, on one hand, he's a different person in that way. He can approach the game differently while being in this better mental space. He's only 29 years old right now, so there's still, there's tackles who play, to their mid 30s, but a lot of it's like, how does the body hold up? And that's the other thing he talked about, is trying to curb some of the injuries that he's just had to play through. And they pretty much, if he can go out there at all physically, they try to put him out there, because you feel so much when he's not out there, and they never seem to have depth at that spot. And so that was one question I asked him, was like, does he have any idea how much longer he wants to play? And he seemed like he just has to he said he's loving football now and he has to see how that's going. But it's going to be an interesting question to see kind of what kind of player is he going to be this year? And then how much longer does he have, and how do they fit that in now that they signed the left tackle to such a big extension? And then also the fact that he's going to play against, with a new right guard and Matt Gonzalez. So he becomes a very fascinating player as far as offensive linemen go. When we're not going to pass, he's mostly been, we talked about him as just like, well, he's very good when he's out there. They're in trouble when he's not. Can he go physically? Now it's sort of like, what is this version of Braden Smith, and how do they weigh that going forward with everything else going on? It's an interesting little side narrative.
That's it for this week's edition of the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. Next week, I am not going to Baltimore. Nate is going to Baltimore for the joint practice, and we will probably tape after you watch that, I would assume.
Mm-hmm.
And I can get your thoughts on it. But that's what we've seen through the first 6 days of camp. There's 3 practices before Nate goes to Baltimore. We'll be all over those. For the Colts Cover-2 Podcast, I'm Joel A. Erickson. This has been Nate Atkins. We will talk to you next week.